Tying up another streamer today. This fly is called the Silver Zonker. The Zonker flies are a very, very basic and simple pattern to tie. There's not much to them. You have basically three different parts: the Mylar tubing for the body, a hackle, and then the rabbit Zonker wing to it. There is some lead wraps along the hook shank on this, but you don't have to have those in there. But it is an excellent baitfish imitation. You can tie this with different types of Mylar, whether it's a pearl or a Chartreuse Mylar or something like that. And you can also vary up the wing. It doesn't have to be black. You can have a white, you can have an olive, or whatever your needs are. Once again, it's just a nice all-around good baitfish pattern to have in your box, and especially this time of year with streamer season, it's a nice fly to throw around, and it's pretty easy to tie. So that's the Silver Zonker, and we'll go ahead and get started tying. We'll start our Zonker by placing our hook in the vise. This is a Tiemco 5263 hook. It is a 4X long streamer hook. I'll debarb the hook. And then I'm going to attach some lead onto the shank of the hook. For this Zonker, I'm using a .020 lead free. I'm going to attach the lead to the hook shank and put in about 15 wraps. Break that off. Smooth that out. And then we'll bunch all of that lead right in the middle of the hook shank. I'm using two different threads for this Zonker. The first thread is going to be a UTC 140 Denier in red. I'm going to attach this to the hook shank, bringing it over the lead. I'm going to bring it to the back side of the lead, and I'm going to build up just a little bit of a thread dam. What this thread dam does is just keeps the lead in place. It doesn't slide up and down the hook shank. Since all of this is going to be covered up with Mylar, it does not have to look pretty. Once I have that in place, I bring my thread to the very end of the hook shank. For the body of the Zonker, we use a Mylar tubing. For this one, I'm using a silver Mylar. You can use a pearl Mylar, or actually you can get these in various colors as well if you want. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the end of this and about a half a shank length of the end of the Mylar. I'm going to pick out, meaning I'm going to take my bodkin in here and I'm going to just pick those fibers all apart. This is just going to give me a little bit of a wavy end to it. Unbraid all of that. I'll then take the Mylar tubing and pushing it over the hook shank. I'll run it down to the end of the hook shank, getting all those loose fibers out, and bring it right down to where my thread hangs. At this stage, I'm going to cut the excess off, but I'm going to fold it back so I can see where the end of the hook shank is, and then I'll just reach in with my scissors and cut the rest of the Mylar off. I want to make certain that the Mylar is sitting down on the hook shank. I don't want it actually up like this or in the center, because then it bunches around. I want to actually push it downward so the hook shank is right along the top here. When this is tied in here and at the front, then the Mylar will come down more as kind of a belly. Holding the end of the Mylar tight in my left hand, I'm going to start putting thread wraps around the hook shank and the Mylar. This is why I'm using 140 Denier on the back end, because I can get some nice tight thread wraps so that that Mylar gets lashed down to the hook shank very well and it doesn't spin as things are tied on. I'm going to do a 3 or 4 turn whip finish on the back end. Try not to build up too many thread wraps. Then I'm going to leave this thread attached. For the front of the fly, I'm going to use a uni thread. This is an 8/0 uni in black. This can be a bit tricky, but I'm going to anchor my thread on my index finger, and then using my middle finger and thumb, I'm going to slide the Mylar back about an eye length or so behind the eye of the hook. I'll attach my thread right behind the eye of the hook and bring it back about an eye length. I can then clip off the excess thread around my finger. I'm going to slide the Mylar forward to where the ends are just behind the eye of the hook, and then using a pinch wrap, I'm going to tie in and anchor down the Mylar. Again, when you do this, you want to try and make certain you're pushing the Mylar in a downward direction so that you'll have a little bit of a belly to the fly. This can be kind of tough, especially if you have rough hands, like I do right at the moment. With that anchored in, you can see where the Mylar comes down below, and I get just a little bit of what looks like a belly on our minnow. So I want to lash the Mylar down about 1.5 eye lengths behind the eye of the hook. We've got some space. We have to tie some things in and make the head here. So better to err on that a little bit wider, a little bit more space than not enough. Otherwise, you'll crowd the eye of the hook. So in the front, the next material that I'm going to tie in is going to be a hackle. This is just a red saddle hackle. We're going to select a saddle hackle that has nice long fibers to it down near the base. I don't need any of the fluff that's too long, so I can go ahead and strip that off. I do want fibers that are going to be about as long as the hook shank. These are going to be a little too long. As you can see, they're going to go past. They would actually get lashed down with the rabbit in the back end. So I want just a little bit shorter. Take a little bit more of these fibers off. And now I have some fibers that are just about the right length. I'll tie the butt end to the hook shank right in front of the silver Mylar, lashing down the stem, taking my thread to about halfway down the head space. Stroking these fibers back, I want to palmer 3 to maybe 4 turns. We don't want to make this too thick, but we do want to have a pronounced red area. This will end up looking like a throat. And if you wanted, you could actually tie this in as a more traditional wet fly throat. We'll trim away the excess hackle. Moistening my fingers, I'm going to slide these fibers back so that I can start wrapping those down. This will get them in a rearward direction. Before I wrap them all the way back, I'm going to now moisten my fingers and kind of stroke them in a downward direction, back and down. Then go back a little bit more, and then when I do this, Now I'm going to clean this up so I have a nice smooth space for my rabbit zonker. And you'll see I have these fibers more or less pointed in a downward direction. It just collects them a little bit more as a throat instead of a collar. Now the wing on the zonker is actually made from a rabbit strip. This is called a zonker strip. The leather is cut in the direction of the fur, I should say the grain of the fur. So therefore all this fur will just stick straight up and it'll flow straight back. It won't go from side to side that much. Keep in mind that when you are tying your zonkers, depending on size hook you're going to use, you're going to want these fibers to be longer or shorter. So when you're buying your zonkers, you want to take a look at the package and see, are the fibers going to be the length you need for the fly that you're going to tie. So I'm going to take the zonker, and at the base of it here, I'm just going to trim off these corners a little bit. This is just going to bring this down to a little bit of a point. Just removes a little bit and it ends up the head's not quite as bulky. I'm going to place this right on top of the fly. I want the little leather tab to be just right behind the eye of the hook. And I'm going to lash this down right in on top of the hook shank. The zonker fly tends to have a larger head on it than a lot of your more traditional wet flies because of that rabbit strip. And that's fine. What some people will do is they'll tie the whole thread head here a little bit further back, and then they'll paint eyes, a white eye with a black pupil on the sides or something like that. Once you have that lashed in, you're just going to clean up the head space and go ahead and get the head done, and then we'll put in a 5 or 6 turn whip finish. We are now done with our black thread. The reason that I'm using 2 threads on this, 2 bobbins I should say, is to maximize the length of, or how much I get, how many flies I get out of my zonker strip. If I were to tie the back end here down first and leave this hanging over to finish this end, not only do I have this possibly in the way of me tying everything on the eye of the hook, but when I tie that down, I then have to cut it. So I'd have a small piece of rabbit fur that I couldn't use. This way, I'm tying this end in and then coming back here, splitting the fur right above where my red thread wraps are. And then I'm going to lash that down, and I'll end up maximizing the usable pieces of my zonker. If I can finish my train of thought there. It's a small thing, but it's just another way that you can tie this fly. Once you have that hair split, you're just going to wrap this in. I only put 5 or 6 nice tight wraps in, because then I'm going to go ahead and do a whip finish right on top of those. This is one of those flies where it is very advantageous to learn how to do a whip finish by hand, because you can, using your fingers, spread the thread out and get back to the end of the shank very easily. So that's done. I'll clip away my thread. The tail on this is usually going to be about a shank length long, but keep in mind these hair fibers are actually going further back. If I were to cut this straight across like this, I'm going to cut these fibers off, and I don't want that. I want the natural hair to just flow behind. So what I'm going to do is cut the skin maybe about a quarter to half a shank length behind the Mylar at the end of the fly. And I'll use one side of my scissors and just kind of saw it back and forth and cut just the skin of that zonker. And that leaves me this nice tapered fur in the back end for a tail. I'm going to put some head cement right on those thread wraps in the back here, and then all on the head. That will soak down in there and secure all of that. Take your bodkin, you can take your comb, you can actually just use your fingers if you want, and just get that fur then going backwards like that. And that is a zonker. I wouldn't get too persnickety about the collar or even the rabbit fur, because when this is in the water, all of this is going to get swept back. It's all going to be swimming and flowing all over the place. It's more important to make certain that it's nice and secure at the back end here and right at the front, and let the rest of the parts of the fly take care of itself. So that's the zonker. This is, as I said, I call this a silver zonker because of the silver Mylar, and that's just to delineate it from what other people may call a pearl Mylar, pearl green, or a pearl zonker, or a pearl green zonker, or whatnot. You're not stuck with just using black for the rabbit. You can use an olive, a yellow, whatever you want. You don't have to put the lead wraps on. It does help this fly get down in the water column a little bit more. You could put some heavier wraps on there or some lighter wraps if you want. But the zonker is a very effective pattern. It represents a bait fish very, very well. And all around, it's an easy fly to tie, and it's a good one to have in your box. That's the Silver Zonker.
Thanks for joining me at the Vise today. I hope you learned at least a new pattern, if not a new technique, maybe a tip or trick here and there. If you have any questions about this fly or any of the techniques used in constructing this pattern, please leave them in the comments section down below. If you go to the trouble to ask a question, I'll go to the trouble to answer it. If you'd like to help dressed irons, please share this video with your friends and anybody you think that might enjoy this pattern. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.